now, really, for the special part of the evening, this is a different AARS evening. Alan Shalita didn't fall asleep during my talks like he usually does because he's not here, and we really, he was so important to us and to the field of acne. So I thank people for coming to help to celebrate his life, and I will turn over the podium to Diane Thiboutot, who will help us all to celebrate his life and career.
Thank you, Larry. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here to pay tribute to Alan. And I just want to say that my biggest memory for Alan is with regard to his role as a mentor. And I think that our society, through the help of all of us, is really focusing on the future, moving forward. Who are going to be our future researchers? So I'm very, very excited about the ability to have our organization serve a mentorship role to the young researchers and the young clinicians and the young people coming after us with interest in acne and rosacea. So I'm going to call up to sit in these wonderful chairs our panel, and then I'm going to be reading a letter from Dr. Strauss, John Strauss, who I think you all know is one of the founding chairmen of our society and a years-long friend of Alan Shalita. So our panelists include Dr. Jim Leyden, Dr. Diane Berson, Dr. Guy Webster, Dr. Hilary Baldwin, and Nancy Mangoia. Nancy was Dr. Shalita's assistant for how many years, Nancy? 28 years. So Nancy was with Alan every day. So we'll get started. I'm going to read the words from Dr. Strauss. So it's celebrating Alan Shalita's life. As you celebrate the life of Alan Shalita, I'm in a unique position to lead off the presentations. I wish I could be at your meeting to present my comments in person, but my progressive health problems may prevent any travel. Dr. Strauss, as you know, has had health issues, and he's undergoing dialysis 3 times a week, but he's very active. He communicates with all of us. He keeps abreast of things. And I'm really happy to be able to share his words with you today. So John says, I've known Alan longer than anyone else at the AARS meeting. We met in 1952 in Providence at one of the first Biology of the Skin meetings run by the late Bill Montagna. In those days, it was a very small meeting of giants in dermatology research. I was a second-year resident, and the only one at the meeting, having been brought there by my mentor, the late Albert Kligman. Alan, a beginning Brown University student, was the projectionist. So can you imagine? Alan's the projectionist at the Montagna meeting. I think that meeting, which was related to the sebaceous glands, had a profound effect on the later clinical and research interest of both of us. To be truthful, while Alan remembered our interaction at that event, my recollection does not go back that long, but starts when Alan became an NIH training fellow at NYU. That's almost 50 years ago, and during that time, our professional relationship, as well as Susan and my social relationship with both Simone and Alan, has been extensive and very close. On a professional level, Alan has always viewed me as a mentor, but I can assure you that as time went on, he was equally a mentor for me. I think the most important part I played in his life was that I recommended him to Jay Bolett, the chairman of medicine at SUNY Downstate. From 1975, when Alan went to SUNY Downstate, the section and then the department grew from a very small unit to one of the largest departments of dermatology in the United States. Alan was an extremely successful teacher, researcher, and internationally well-known member of the dermatologic profession. As a faculty member, Alan's teaching skills were recognized by SUNY Downstate by his designation as a distinguished teaching professor. Alan was appointed to many administrative positions at SUNY Downstate. For 4 years, he was on He was my on-site deputy secretary of the 18th World Congress in New York. He was on numerous task forces and councils and was the vice president of the Academy. He was also president of the American Dermatological Association, the Association of Professors of Dermatology, as well as local dermatologic organizations in Greater New York. I could go on and on in discussing his professional life, but what I want to end with is our social relationship. We were close friends. I talked to Alan at least 2 to 3 times a week over the years, and we met as often as possible given the distance between our locations. I substituted for him giving his talk at the World Congress in Sydney and at the EADV in Rhodes. I want to close with some experiences from traveling with Alan and Simone. First, they were not known to travel light with their luggage. On an occasion when we went from London to Brockett Hall, a nearby country estate that was a meeting site, we arrived in not one, but 2 Bentleys. One for us, the second for the luggage. Did you hold up your fingers?
I did.
Okay, you were right. And he says, I know that Jim Leyden will remember that arrival. The second happening with Alan that I will never forget. Alan had his likes and dislikes of food. Can you imagine having to find the Golden Arches in downtown Tokyo? Not once, but twice, so that he could get a Big Mac. The third event was the joy of playing golf with Alan. He was wonderful to me on the course because he tolerated my poor golf. But the best thing was that Alan had a love for golf woods that had bigger and bigger heads. He not only loved them, but he bought them very quickly. If I was standing by him, I would end up with a slightly used golf club that Alan was replacing. Finally, one of the joys of traveling with Alan and Simone was that they always had something to treat you with, no matter what ailed you, because they always traveled with what seemed like a small pharmacy. I could say much more, but to suffice it to say that we have all lost a leading educator, researcher, and clinician, and more importantly, a close and dear colleague. He will be missed. Thank you, John. So I mentioned earlier about my memories of Alan as being a mentor. He and Jim and John and others really started helping me when I really first began as a resident and then as a junior faculty. And they were always a comforting sight at a meeting. So I'd go to a meeting, I knew Alan would be there, and he was somebody I could come up to and talk to and would take interest in what I was doing, and I was always grateful for that. Some of my favorite memories of Alan were going to New York. He always had us come as visiting professor to the department at SUNY, which I loved going. Residents were always very engaged, and it was just a great experience. And I would meet Alan in the Pick-a-Bagel on 77th. And he would pull up in his car, double park, come in, and pick up his bagel order. And I'd be in there with my cup of coffee waiting for him. So he'd come in with his beige trench coat with the belt that I don't think he ever lost over all those years. So I would spot Alan, trench coat, half off, belt trailing, coming into the Pick-a-Bagel to pick up the big bag. And every kind of cream cheese that you could possibly imagine had to be in the bag. And we would drive together over Brooklyn. Across the bridge, he'd tell me about the bridge, tell me about Brooklyn. I learned a lot. But I really, really enjoyed knowing Alan, and I'm very grateful for all that he's done for me and for all that he's done for all of us in this room. It's not just me, it's you. And talking with you in the audience, I know many of you have known him for years and years. You may have called on him as a representative at one point. You work in his lab, you were in his department, you were trained by him. So we really miss Alan. He was a great guy, and I just hope that I can be as good a mentor as he is someday. Okay. All right, I think, let's see, I'll call you, Guy. I'm just going to call whomever I want.
In order to better mess up the AV guy.
Yeah.
Well, it's an honor to stand up here and remember Alan. He, way back when I was an undergraduate at the University of Penn, hanging around Jim Leyden trying to get a letter of recommendation for med school. Alan came
Never
through.
gave one.
No, but yet I'm here. Alan came through as a visiting professor, and he talked to me like I was a human being. And I was used to that with the Penn people because they were kind and all. But for an outside guy to actually pay attention to me when I deserved to have no attention paid said a lot about who Alan was. And over the years, as I got to know him better, it became more obvious that wasn't a random act. That was Alan, and he's just special. And the goodwill among the acne and rosacea crowd that is not duplicated among any other group in dermatology. You all can make your lists of crowds that hate each other and have their infighting. We don't seem to have that. And I think the forefathers, Alan, not the least of them, gets credit for that. I have just one slide to show. Can you bring that up? Or do I bring that up? Anybody who's been in a meeting with Alan knows that he was like the canary in the mine. When the meeting got bad, when the same things were being said time after time, often after lunch, but some meetings went south very quickly, even in the morning, Alan would drop off to sleep. And whoever was leading the meeting, knowing it was Alan's thing to fall asleep, would instantly ask him a question. And he'd be snoring, and he'd wake up and he'd answer the question. And I have no idea how he did that.
I will explain.
Jim, it's your turn. You may explain.
No, I mean later.
No, that's all I have to say.
I will explain that, but I say a few other things first. Alan and I met in 1967 when, as only he could put it, we were NIH fellows together at Penn and NYU. He used to come down to Penn a lot to visit with Albert Kligman, and as you heard, he was first attracted to dermatology by his association with Bill Montagna, the great anatomist and person who described most of what we kind of take for granted nowadays about the anatomy of skin. And he was a very close friend of Albert Kligman, and I have been swept up into the Kligman vortex as a medical student. So I guess since they were very good friends, it was probably ordained somewhere that we would become good friends. But we clearly felt we were more than good friends. As far as we know, we did not share any DNA, but we thought of each other as brothers. Alan frequently introduced me when I would visit his department to give a talk. He would introduce me as the brother I never had. And whenever asked, I would say I have two brothers, one by my mother and one by somebody I never met. So we were very close friends, that's for sure. And over the years, we were together an inordinate amount of time, I think, not just at meetings like the Academy and the SID and various advisory boards, but we Simone and Alan and Claudette and I, made many trips together, usually associated with a meeting, one of which I know Diane will remember well, is we started in Rome where she surprised her daughter Gabby, and then we went to Sicily, Taormina or something. And then after that, Alan and Simone and Claudette and I did the whole island. And then we went to St. Petersburg. So we had meetings like that. My wife's 60th birthday, we had a meeting in Hawaii. We went to Australia, if you can imagine a sight. I invite you to think of this, Alan, Shalita snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef. If they were looking for that plane back then, they would have probably identified him as a possible thing to further investigate. We've been to China. I can't tell you how many times we've been to Ireland and Paris together. We did the Nile and the Valley of the Kings, and the list goes on and on and on. So I think I kind of really know him. I've probably spent more time with him as an adult than I have with my brother and sister, and we have dinner once a month. So, but it's clear that Alan and I spent a lot of time together, and he had a lot of wonderful qualities. I'll just mention a few of them that maybe will be worth mentioning tonight. He had a tremendous sense of humor. He had a saying for everything. U.S. air was useless air. every expensive, overpriced restaurant we were in, he would say, these people belong to the why charge less school of thought. And he loved to tell jokes, and I was a perfect foil for his jokes, because whatever Broca's area for remembering jokes is, I have some kind of mutation or deletion. I cannot remember a joke. So he would tell jokes, and Simone would say, Alan, you told him that joke twice tonight, you know. But to me, it was a brand new joke. He was a voracious reader. He was constantly sending me books that I should read before the next time we met so we could discuss them. He was particularly a fan of Henry II, the king who conquered France, and he loved Eleanor of Aquitaine. And he told me once, he said, I have this feeling that in a former life, I was Henry II. So that was kind of an interesting trait of him. You heard about his penchant for deep thought that Guy brought up, and Larry alluded to in meetings. And we all wondered, how in the hell could he be sound asleep and wake up and make comments about slides, 2 slides while he was sound asleep? Well, there's some really interesting research now which I think explains this, literally. It's been discovered primarily in birds, and I did discuss this with Alan. It's been discovered in birds that when they need to sleep, they form circles. And the birds in the middle, both hemispheres are asleep. The birds in the periphery sleep with one eye open, which, Alan, that picture is one eye is always kind of open. They sleep with one eye open, and the corresponding hemisphere is awake, and the other hemisphere is asleep. And then during the night, they rotate, and then the other hemisphere goes to sleep. So that's what he was doing. And I explained this to him, and he said, "So you're calling me a bird brain?" I thought we were friends. I said, "No, I'm just explaining, how this was the case." He was the most optimistic, upbeat person I know, and God knows that was a quality that served him well when you consider the unbelievable family tragedies that he and Simone had to endure. And you've heard already some mentions about golf, which I will now also mention, because nowhere was his optimism better expressed than in golf. Alan was not blessed with natural golfing ability. John Strauss said it was a close race between which of them was not blessed the most. But Alan and I played a lot of golf together. Several years ago, those Golf Digest magazines, they said the 100 best courses in America you can play. We went through and we played in 52 of them together, and several of them many times together. We loved to play golf together, and often associated with the meeting. And we would always try and play by ourselves so we didn't have to, so we could talk and not have others, interfere too much. And our favorite golf course was in Hawaii, Mauna Kea, particularly the back nine, specifically the 17th hole. We were there one day, 30 years ago, I guess, and it was like 5 o'clock at night, and it was a perfect day, and the shadows were shimmering, and the trade winds, it sounded almost like, cloistered monks singing, and we just sat there for about 10 minutes, just silent. And finally he said, "I think we found heaven." Yeah. So he loved to play golf with me because he always played better with me. And that's because, as Guy and others know, when Alan would start playing, he would get into the Shalita crouch. He would get down into, stance like this. And it didn't matter what club he had in his hand. He couldn't hit it any further than the distance in this room. And I would, once he started doing that, I'd go up to him and say, "Alan, excuse me, give me the driver." And I would hand him a 7-wood, and he'd say, "What are you giving me this for?" I said, there are bunkers out there about 280. We need to take them out of play. Use this club." And he would stand up, relax, and then hit a reasonable shot. My favorite story is one day we were playing. It was the 17th hole of par 5, and he hit a drive I can still picture. It was some kind of accident. It was absolutely glorious. He goes down, stands over to the next shot, hits it into the woods. Cigarette hanging out of the corner of his mouth, pulls out a ball, drops it, hits the ball into the woods. Drops the ball, hits it into the lake. By this time, I'm on the ground laughing so hard, I was almost in tears. Then he hit another glorious shot. And he goes down and he chips on 2 putts. So we were kidding around. I said, okay, Alan, what do you want for that hole? He said, give me a 6. I said, 6? I stopped counting at 8. He said, well, I don't count those shots. They ruin an otherwise perfectly good hole. I did take a penalty stroke. And I said, well, you got a 6, I got a 5. That means since I'm giving you a stroke on each hole that, that's a push. And he said, that's really a shame. You deserve better. So the next hole, I said, let's just go in and have a beer. I want you to tell me again how you played that hole so well. Alan was incredibly generous. He would help anybody who needed help. And on many of these prolonged trips, one of his slightly annoying but delightful traits was he would buy gifts for everybody. As everybody in his family, in the apartment, people who work in the janitorial service at the hospital. And he usually bought so many gifts on those trips, we had to buy suitcase to take home the gifts. And as you heard, they do travel heavy, which meant I had to take the suitcase home because we travel lightly in our family. And another great quality of Alan was he loved children. And children instantly, like animals, recognized him as a friend. And I will tell you, I've been to any department with more than, I don't know, I've been to most departments. And there's no department where the person responsible cared and nurtured residents the way he did. He viewed his residents as his children. And he kept it, it's an amazing the way he did that. And the best story I think I have of that was he would have these periodic reunions, and he'd invite a couple of us to come up to give some talks. And we were one year before dinner, all these children of former residents were coming up. He knew their names, and they knew him. And then at dinner, the wife of, I won't tell you, he's not alive either, but his wife was commenting on how these children of former residents, Alan seemed to know. And she turned to her husband and said, and you barely know the names of your current residents. That's how different he was. And then finally, the best story I have of Alan was after a meeting in Beijing, we went on a tour. There were, I think, 9 of us. Wei Li's here, she was part of that group. And it was just as China was beginning to open up, and we were required to have something called a national tour guide accompanying us. We think he was probably there to make sure we weren't spies or that we didn't see anything that would be misinterpreted as not good. And strangely enough, even though he was Chinese, his name was Norman. We suspected they gave him a Western name to make us feel more comfortable with him. And on about the second day, we were somewhere in a garden, and Alan was on a bench with his arms folded, his head down, some kind of guttural sounds coming out. And Norman said, Alan is Buddha. For the rest of the trip, we called him Buddha. And on the last day, as we were going back to our hotel, we were in the van, and Norman and I, everybody had their place. We were in the back, and Norman leaned over, tears in his eyes, and said, Jim, I love Buddha. Alan had surprised him with a gift for himself and one for his wife. And I said, Norman, everybody loves Buddha. And I think that's the way all of us in this room feel. God knows I love them. I think of them every day, many, many times, and I remember things when we were together. And I if you see me suddenly looking off and laughing, it's because I'm thinking of Alan and something that happened with the two of us together. So I think I would end the way we always said goodbye. Whenever we talked, or by phone or email, or particularly at a meeting, I would give the Irish farewell of keep the faith. And Alan would say, "A bientôt, my friend, a bientôt." So Alan, I know you're listening somewhere. A bientôt, my friend, a bientôt.
I'm so honored to be here tonight to celebrate the life of Dr. Alan Shalita. As you know, Dr. Shalita had been chairman of the Department of Dermatology at SUNY Downstate Medical Center for the past 39 years. And I have had the honor and privilege to work with him for 28 years. Like so many others, I am grateful for the opportunities given to me by this wonderful man. He was more than a chairman to all of us. He was a gentleman first, with a great sense of humor, a family man, a friend. But he was a dedicated physician, teacher, mentor, researcher, counselor, leader, and administrator. He was a loyal faculty member of the SUNY Downstate community, and in turn, all of his faculty, residents, and staff were loyal to him. He created a very relaxed atmosphere in the department with his open door policy. He was always available to medical students, residents, faculty, and staff, and his patients. It was told to me by many at Downstate that he was the favorite chairman at Downstate. He truly was one of a kind. I know many of you in the audience have had the opportunity to visit our department and spend some time with Dr. Shalita in his office and may have noticed that he had a messy desk.
That's actually pretty
That's
clean.
okay.
Well, no, I have better ones. I have better. Go ahead. There you go. Okay.
Revisionist history.
It was truly amazing that he knew where everything was on that desk, and he knew if anything was moved. 3 years ago, we had a flood in the department, which destroyed the entire department but his office. The flood, there was water everywhere. It defied the law of gravity. I said to him, Dr. Shalita, can I, tidy up your office a bit? And he looked at me and he said, "You are just too willing." He says, "No, I'll take care of it." But of course, we know he never did. Dr. Shalita was a very kind, generous, thoughtful, and nurturing man. There wasn't a birth he didn't acknowledge with his signature baby blanket. I received a blanket when my daughter, Kristen, was born 24 years ago. And 2.5 years ago, when I became a grandma, he gave my grandson a blanket. Tyler uses that blanket every day when he takes his nap. Dr. Shalita was an avid traveler, as you heard by Dr. Leyden and Dr. Webster and Dr. Strauss. Upon his return from the office, he would call the staff into his office one at a time and present each of us with a handkerchief from far-off lands, with a story about his travels. We all have quite a collection. We all look forward to listening to his travel experiences because he was such a great storyteller. He was always a gracious host, always going out of his way to make visiting guests comfortable. We were always planning dinners for grand round speakers and department events. I'm sure many of you in the audience can remember going to restaurants in Manhattan and Brooklyn with Dr. Shalita and the residents. The next day, he would come to the office, give me the receipt for the dinner, wait for my reaction, and tell me, "Don't have a heart attack. There's no price for a good time." We had weekly conversations about bagels and cream cheese, making sure he had enough food for his residents. He not only took care of his residents, but he took care of the chairman at his weekly chairman's meeting at Downstate, bringing them bagels and everything sticks from the Pick a Bagel. Always nurturing. One story I'd like to share with you. Dr. Kligman was Dr. Shalita's mentor and friend, and on many occasions he would tell me it's time to send Dr. Kligman his care package. In the beginning, I thought it was some kind of medication or cream from a drug company. Nope. That meant pastrami and corned beef sandwiches, knishes, jelly donuts, rugelach, and black and white cookies from Zabar's, a Jewish deli in Manhattan. Dr. Kligman would call the office with great appreciation of Dr. Shalita's kindness. During Passover, he would bring into the office his homemade horseradish and matzah and initiate the first-year residents with his specialty. On a regular basis, he would bring in Entenmann chocolate donuts and tell the residents to be careful if they ate them because they were the fertility drug of the department. Of course, he failed to mention that Mrs. Shalita would not let him eat them at home. When he was hospitalized, he was visited by our faculty, staff, residents, and alumni regularly. We always hung on the hope that he would return and recover enough to come to visit us and be Professor Emeritus. But I guess God had other plans for him. When I visited Dr. Shalita in the hospital 2 days before he passed, in order to make the goodbye easier for him and myself, for I knew in my heart it wasn't going to be long. I kissed him goodbye and thanked him. And before he could say anything, I said to him, Dr. S., if this germ thing doesn't work out, you and I catering in Brooklyn. He smiled at me and he said, go for it, kid. Dr. Shalita leaves a grieving family, a downstate community, faculty, residents, staff, and patients. His legacy lives on in the hearts of all of us. Words cannot express how much I miss him. He will never be forgotten. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
There's definitely a common thread here. I have to say, training with Dr. Shalita was truly a privilege. I vividly remember my residency interview with him 30 years ago. Oh, I see you're out there too in the picture. 30 years ago, we had that interview, and if you could put that picture up again, that's exactly what the desk looked like.
It didn't change, I'm telling you.
And I had this interview and thought, whoa, because that desk just looked exactly the same. Joining his department was like joining a family with Dr. S., Ed, Neil, Faye, Nancy, Whaley, and every Wednesday, just as you said, we all met together for our Derm Path sessions and all of our academic sessions. Dr. S. brought donuts, bagels, cream cheese, and other treats. He was definitely the male version of a quintessential Jewish mother, if you know what that is. Each item had to be purchased at the correct place. So he would drive around New York City literally at dawn to schlep all this food to Brooklyn. And the running joke indeed was that there was something in that food that made at least one resident per year become pregnant. It was uncanny. And when I was a chief resident, when I was a second year resident, Ellen Teplitz got married, and I was very pregnant, and I got this maternity dress to wear to Ellen Teplitz's wedding, and I just left it hung up there. And every year, a resident wore that pink and white floral dress to some occasion, and it became the downstate maternity dress. It might even still be there. I don't even know.
Probably in the office.
I think it's somewhere there. And I have to say, later he really did act like a grandpa to all of those offspring, and he really did know every child's name. Dr. S. had a well-balanced team, women and men, though he was always teased about having a soft place in his heart for the women, always referred to lovingly as Alan's Angels. He was truly responsible for giving many women the chance to enter the field of dermatology. He championed their success and for almost 40 years nurtured and supported all of us, worrying about all of us despite his personal tragedies. Having a shared interest in acne allowed me to travel to many conferences all over the world with Dr. S. And I can say that everyone loved him. He always added a level of warmth and humor to those meetings. He fell asleep, but always knew what was being said. And I have to say, as word spread about his passing, emails and messages from dermatologists all over the globe made it clear how much he was respected, admired, and loved, and what an impact he had on so many professionally and personally. I just want to mention some Dr. Shalita-isms, and I have a feeling Hilary, who's very funny, is going to have a lot more good ones. My Dr. Shalita-isms were that acne was referred to as zits and goobers, that there was no such thing as a relapse after Accutane. He always asked about the yentas, and that referred to a little group of us that he lovingly called the yentas. He always brought home little ketchups from every single meeting. Everyone knows that. Everyone's nodding. Every meeting he went to all over the world, he had to bring a little ketchup to his grandson, Daniel, his beloved grandson. And that was really something he did wherever he went. He would bring home, sneak little bottles of things for him. Dr. S was like a teddy bear. He was always hugging. He was the true definition of a mensch. He had a heart of gold, and he was always trying to help and connect people with each other, to help enrich their careers. He always shared a joke, and most of them were bad, not good. But he loved telling jokes, and he repeated the same ones over and over.
Only I laughed each time.
Because you forgot.
He had nicknames for a lot of us, and they can't be repeated. But he had some interesting nicknames for a lot of us in this room and elsewhere. He was really like a father figure to me, especially after my own dad passed away. He became close to my husband, who, this is not a HIPAA violation, because when my husband did his cataract surgery and he had Allergan intraocular lenses, every time he saw an Allergan executive anywhere, he would always say, "Diane's husband put Allergan intraocular lenses in my eyes," and he would always proudly tell that to everyone, that he had the Allergan intraocular lens. My daughter was a recipient of one of those special pink blankies, and it had rips and holes and tears in it, but actually we couldn't part her from that blanket till it was lost, actually, on a trip, and I never told him. And she was devastated. And as far as my son is concerned, when he was a week old and we had his bris, everyone was waiting for the moil to come in. That's who performs the circumcision. And Dr. Shalita walked in the door, and everyone said, "Finally," they thought he was there. It's true. And he said, "Well, I've done it before, I can do it." And I have to tell you that every time my son has seen him over the past 24 years, he always thanks him for not trying to undertake that task. He doesn't know what he'd be like right now if he had. I have to say, we all have had a special bond with Dr. Shalita, everyone in this room. He is so special, and I know I'm going to really miss him.
I am remarkably bad at this, and the only person who knows how bad I am at this more than I do is not here. He called me Bubbles, by the way. There's my name. Not even sure what that meant, but I think I didn't like it. My kids called him Papa Smurf. They thought he looked like a Smurf. I'm not exactly sure what that means either. But my beginning with the man that I'm going to refer to as Alan, I never, ever called him Alan in my entire life. I called him Boss because he insisted that I not call him Dr. Shalita, but I couldn't handle Alan. So in 1993, 3 months before finishing my residency, out of the blue, I got a phone call from Alan Shalita. I had met him maybe once or twice in my whole life, and I didn't even know that he knew my name, and I was certainly surprised that he had called me. In his usual abrupt, no beating around the bush, direct manner, he said, "I hear your program hasn't offered you a job. What a bunch of putzes. Come work with me. Can you be here on July 1st? So I was terribly flattered. Actually, I didn't know that my program wasn't offering me a job, so it was I was a little dismayed, but happy at the same time. So,
Hilary, with all the hell you raised at NYU,
I know. We were comrades in pain. So 3 months later, I was happily entrenched at downstate and immersed in what would become one of the most meaningful relationships of my adult life. From day one, he treated me as an equal, not as a junior attending, not as someone who had graduated 3 days before, but his partner in crime. Our department, all of you know well, in a hideous neighborhood, ugly, dirty, woefully small, and fire hazard overcrowded. I mean, this room is not crowded, but there is, take all of you guys and put you literally into one tiny little conference room, and that's what we were like on Wednesdays. And we had prime real estate at Downstate. We were actually wedged between the animal crematorium and the nuclear waste disposal center. I kid you not, that's where the office was. When they asked me, when we were doing interviews for medical students, they asked me specifically to indicate where the department was. I said, you really don't want me to do that. And Nancy didn't mention when the flood occurred, what the flood was the tanks from the cleaning fluid from cleaning the animal quarters above us broke. So we had animal piss and animal poop and all the medicines and all the diseases that they had coming through the ceiling and into the wall, again, in every room except for his. So we had this horrible physical plant, but was nonetheless an incredibly sunny place filled with laughter and camaraderie. And we were a mom and pop stand in this sea of huge, high-powered New York institutions, yet he built the department into one of the largest ones in the country that combined excellent education with a low-key atmosphere. We became known as the happy program. Everybody wanted to come to us because we had all of the good and none of the really unnecessary bad. I mean, not to degrade our specialty, but we're dermatologists, it doesn't have to be that hard to be a good dermatologist and to do things well, and he knew that. I think most of the reason why it was such a happy program was him, but also our dear Ed Heilman sitting in the back, who's now, unfortunately for him, acting chair. I'm sorry, Ed. But he and Ed were just wonderful teachers, and Ed, of course, still is, and mentors. He was so supportive to his staff and residents, regardless of our desired paths in life. He was like a good father. He didn't care what you did. He just said, do what you want to do, but just make sure you do it well. And that was his mantra. His biggest insult in life, I think, was to call somebody plain vanilla. Remember that? He was intolerant. I'm sorry, Chris, if you're still here, close your ears. He was intolerant of bullshit and subterfuge. If you wanted something from him, he hated preamble. Now, I'm the queen of preamble and justification for what I'm about to say. So he'd always say to me, Hilary, what the hell do you want? Just get to the point. He was unfailingly honest and uninterested in self-aggrandizement and self-promotion. He was devoted to his department, and he loved all of us in his humble and simple and very warm way. He was equally supportive of the personal life of his staff and his residents, and he graciously allowed things like relocation to other programs right in the middle of their residency, even if it would be sort of a drag on the program. And as Diane mentioned, it's not a secret that he liked to surround himself with women, blonde women, to be specific. We've graduated more blonde women than the rest of the country combined, and perhaps why I sort of bleached my hair just a little bit, you think, to be...
I was a brunette when I started.
Yeah, me too.
But you wanted
Me
to get
too.
out.
I know. You wanted to become one of Alan's angels, you had to bleach your hair. He also wouldn't punish his residents for becoming pregnant. In most programs, he became pregnant, and it was just, the end of the world. I remember my former chairman referring to introducing his residents to a visiting professor, and this is Dr. Webster, and this is Dr. Baldwin, and to poor Lauren Cooper, this is Brooke's mother. That's what he said about her, because she had become pregnant, had the audacity to become pregnant during her residency. But he encouraged this activity, and he got what he wanted in really full measure. I don't think a year went by that somebody wasn't pregnant or that a resident graduated without becoming pregnant at least once. And by my count, I think we have produced 12 sets of twins and 3 sets of triplets. wonder why that was.
No.
And as was mentioned before, we blamed his favorite Entenmann's chocolate and robe donuts for our abundant fertility. My favorite personal story about Alan dates back to 1990. The position that was open for me to fill when he invited me to join the faculty was surgical. And of all the things I was ever interested in doing in dermatology, surgery was not one of them. And I felt totally inadequate to fill this role. So I spent all of my spare time when I wasn't working going from office to office to office of my old teachers, learning how to do things that I never had the interest in learning how to do. And they would let me assist, and it was a much kinder and gentler time. They actually let me bring my patients to their office, and they would assist me in doing surgical procedures. It was wonderful. But all of these people were his friends, and sometimes he would call, and he would find out that I was there sort of accidentally. And one day, he called me into his office, and he said, "What the hell are you doing? You know, I knew you weren't a surgeon when I hired you, but I can always make a nice person into a good surgeon, but I can't turn a good surgeon into a nice person." And he said, "Just relax." And I always thought this was the essence of his success, that he placed more importance in the inner goodness of a person, and frankly also an amusing personality, because he wanted to be amused, than surrounding himself with people who had book smarts, not me. So he was my friend, my mentor, my role model, and I was proud and honored to have served as mom to his pop for 22 years. I'll miss him sorely. Thank you.
Oh, you took mine. That's okay. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I just want to say that we have a book. You may have seen it when you came in, that if you want to write a couple words about Alan, I know it's crowded. You might not be able to do it right now or tonight. But the little memory book will be at our AARS booth, so we encourage you to come on by and take a little bit of time. You can write a couple words. We'll be sharing that with Simone, and I know that she would really appreciate it. So thank you, Elle, and I'll turn it back to Larry.
Thank you, Diane, and thank all the presenters. It makes me realize, you know, we're busy at the AAD, but I think what we know is that our professional lives give opportunities for us to have personal relationships that enrich us. And that's Alan's story, right? So please join us for a drink to Alan at the end, and thank you so much for coming and helping to celebrate his life. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.